So, hello and welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about how to build and accelerate your digital business. And my name is Bart Manuel. I'm founder of Dept, and I'm really happy that today I'm joined by Ted Schadler. And Ted is a industry analyst at Forrester. His research agenda focuses on platform business models, digital transformation, digital experience platforms, and digital experience agencies. And Ted, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Bart.
Thanks. I did discover that you invented the Forrester Wave report. It was then called Forrester Tech Rankings.
Invented is a pretty big word. Sorry.
When was that? When was that?
Yeah. Invent's a big word. There were lots of folks who made that thing come to life, including the person with the original idea, which actually was not me. But yeah, I was part of the team that launched it, and we did it in 1998, launching in '99.
Yeah,
and it was the first time anybody had really, gone hands-on with products and tried to figure out how they work and stack ranked them. So yeah, it was quite a thing.
Has been around ever since. It would be nice to take a look back at the first reports and see, which of the predictions have held true throughout the times. But probably, some of them did. Maybe
we have some for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So today we have about half an hour, a little bit over half an hour. We'll see how it goes. If there's any Q&A, so anyone in the audience who wants to pose a question into the Q&A, please do so on your appropriate channel. Our moderators will try to pick it up and feed them to us, and we'll see what we can do with it. So hopefully we'll get some interaction going. That'd be great. And I wanted to discuss a couple of topics with you today, Ted. And out of three topics, the first one would be that a title of your report, that one of the reports that you recently made just before summer, I think it was launched. It was titled "The Pandemic Recession Demands a Digital Response." And I think we can all agree these days, that literally the only certainty we have is uncertainty. And I think most of us, we are watching Corona numbers. Like we are watching the stock exchanges. So the word recession might be even an understatement there. So you state in that report, or you try to answer a couple of questions about how to adapt and grow. Businesses must get lean, go all in on ecosystems, and embrace agile at scale. Now let's talk about what this all means. All this getting lean and agile, etc. But first, what do you see now at the stage of that businesses are in?
Yeah.
And do they have the ability at all to adapt and grow right now, or are things much more dire? So, what is your view on where we are at right now?
Yeah, I know, Bart. That's a great question. As you might imagine, I think all of us kind of jumped in and tried to figure out how to help. The whole sector, the whole technology and digital sector, really, I think from vendors and agencies and service providers and research houses like ourselves, we just wanted to get in and problem solve and whatever we could do. So one of the things we did at Forrester, because we do research, is we got our heads together and we tried to figure out what was going on before it was clear what was going on. Everybody knew that there was shock to the system, hospitality collapsed, retail. Stores, society changed overnight, remote work. So we went out and we did a bunch of research and talked to a bunch of companies, and then we did a large-scale survey, actually. And in the survey, we were able to get some data to validate a hypothesis, which is that some companies are really in survival mode. In fact, it's about 1 in 7 companies, 1 in 8 companies are in survival mode. But
are those companies also the companies that are being kept afloat by the different forms of government subsidies, etc.?
Yeah, there's a lot of I think contributions to their success or survival so far. One of which is certainly subsidies by governments, with a safety net or loans, or different governments did it in different ways. But to provide that sort of protection, whether it was keeping employees paid or actually subsidizing the businesses themselves. So there were, and a lot of companies also, they furloughed employees, they preserved cash, they sort of stopped a lot of tech projects for sure, those companies. But the majority of companies, over 50%, are in what we call adaptive mode. And these are companies that are really kind of responding very directly and I think appropriately to the current situation. And we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we talk about the importance of digital in that. But then there's actually a lot of companies, more than 25% of companies are actually growing. And so it's not like an even, right, exactly. So whereas other recessions, everybody kind of took a hit. In this recession, if you like, it's not universal. It's also not universal by country or by region. Some regions like America, for example, are hit in very, very hard ways. But 27% of enterprises in North America and in Europe are in what we call growth mode and are actually growing through this challenging time and investing.
And during which period was that? That was Q1, Q2 of this year up until May, June?
So the data set came from, I'm remembering now, it's the last week of April through the first and second week of May. So when, post-March, post kind of the early hit on April. We'll get a refresh on that data in the fall here sometime. But, that was a very, I think, important kind of, analysis to do, because the advice we would give or the actions, our clients or your clients would take vary, of course, based on where they are. And growth, that's one thing that I think everybody can kind of get their head wrapped around. Survival, that's another thing. It's the adaptive part, which is the majority of companies, where I think the biggest tension, maybe that's one way to say it, lies. So what do you do when you're adapting? Yeah, so that's right. We have the slide.
I think this is from the report where you sort of categorized it in three broad categories. But it did surprise me a little bit that the picture that you are painting is actually quite not that negative. It's quite optimistic, where you say, I mean, only 1 out of 6 is literally in survival mode. So that meaning 5 out of 6 companies would be either in adaptive or in growth mode. And you'd figure that the large middle group adaptive mode would be should be finding ways to switch out of adaptation and try to recover into growth mode again.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of actions they're taking, and it'd be fun to explore some of them together today. But remember that I didn't show you the data on a slide here, but growth mode means growing, actually, and it's self-reported revenue growth in the last quarter. That was the way the question was worded. And survival is shrinking for sure. And adaptive is somewhere in between. So not all of those adaptive companies are growing. In fact, quite a few of them are shrinking, but they're not shrinking by as much. Their revenues have declined, but not by as much. And so they are laying the foundation, the groundwork for return to growth. Absolutely. And parts of their business are growing. Yeah.
Hey, when you talk about laying the foundation and taking the actions to adapt and to return to growth, what's sort of the and obviously the title of your report is already sort of answering the question a little bit, and we're preaching to the choir here a little bit, by demanding a digital response. But if we zoom in a little bit on that, because it's easy to say, hey, you need to make your business go digital because that's the way out of the recession, et cetera, et cetera. But it's easier said than done, right? Yeah. And so, what are the sort of the things that if you make it really practical, and if you look at the practicalities of the pressure that's on with a lot of companies in terms of getting the cash cycle flowing again, making sure that any investment that is made will deliver a return very quickly. Because there's no long-term horizon to operate on. The next month is as important as the next year, so to speak. So what are the sort of the actions and the strategies that you would see in this adaptive mode to make that jump to the digital transformation?
Yeah, I think the way that we have thought about it and what's really captured in this report starts with the reality. And the reality was employees are working at home and customers are not leaving their home. This is back in the March-April timeframe, and that persists as well. We've hardly returned to life as normal. So companies jumped in immediately and responded by making sure their employees were safe and productive. So the remote work was job one, and that happened very, very quickly. People flocked to the cloud. They jumped on these collaboration tools. For example, they supported and set up network access to the corporate resources. And so there was a tremendous surge of investment to support productive remote work, which persists and will be maintained even as people start to come back into offices. And the second thing was to make sure customers were safe and getting the service they needed. And that's where the investments really had that sort of outward-facing growth potential, if you like, flavor. And the big one is if you relied on an in-person transaction sale, whether that's B2C or B2B, you had to go digital. And so things, like curbside pickup in grocery, for example. So most grocers didn't have curbside pickup or buy online pickup in store. They didn't have that. So how would a grocer create that really quickly? Or if you are selling a high-tech product for helping a remote or home worker be productive, you need to have the same thing. If you already had an e-commerce channel, well, that was good. But now you need to do things like home delivery and curbside pickup and all kinds of things that require these investments in digital. Whether you were in growth mode or in adaptive mode, those were changes you had to make. Another example, and I'm sure we can find many, in hospitality and restaurants was home delivery. And a lot of restaurants found themselves going to a third party, a DoorDash type company in order to do that home delivery, which is, I think, indicative of a change that we want to acknowledge and call attention to, which is that companies did what they had to do, working with existing and new partners, using the cloud resources where they existed in order to adapt and respond to the need. And that was a new behavior for lots of companies.
I think, from my perspective, I think it's fair to say if this crisis would have happened sort of 5 to 7 years earlier, a lot of the sort of the cloud and all the, sort of the infrastructure as a service, as you have it also in the physical space, like Amazon's building and all these delivery companies are building, it would have been disastrous, and now it was sort of manageable, right? I mean, and it is just providing opportunity. The only question that you might have, for instance, like restaurants, as you mentioned, signing up now all of a sudden for home delivery, and maybe turning your restaurant into a dark kitchen. Is that the strategy and the best value add that you would want to have for your business in the long run? It might not have been the case.
Yeah, no, Bart, I think you said it really nicely earlier when you said the next month is as important as the next year. And when you are in a liquidity crunch, when you're worried about either surviving or adapting, you need to be thinking that way. And so making investments for the long term might feel counterproductive. Because you might be saying, well, why would I spend for things that might only be a year away? And so this is a really important point here, which I heard the term even just a few hours ago from somebody, of relentless reprioritization, meaning that the executive teams are not doing quarterly or annual or even monthly prioritization exercises. They may even be doing weekly or bi-weekly prioritization exercises across the company. This is the other kind of behavior that I think we really want to call attention to, is that in responding to the crisis, companies pulled together all their departments. They worked together in a different way. So marketing and sales, or marketing and commerce, for example, which may have had separate missions.
Don't you think that the fact that all of a sudden everyone was working from home and sort of the physical compartmentalization of the physical offices all of a sudden gone might have been a blessing in disguise for finally getting sort of cross-departmental work done?
I think so. That's another thing that I think we should really pay attention to here, that people have grown comfortable working in this sort of virtual collaborative way. And it does break down a lot of hierarchical boundaries and a lot of departmental boundaries, right? People come together and everybody has a voice. It also makes it easier to work with a partner, because that partner might be bringing expertise or service in, and they are just another box on the screen.
It's the great leveler in a way. We'll get to that in a way.
Okay,
so
good.
just to wrap this up a little bit, and I want to move on to sort of the second part of our discussion, also with an eye on the clock here.
Yeah.
And I do want to get a little bit technical with you. So my background is as a developer and a architect, and I've been, in the beginning of my agency life, been building stuff myself. So I have a particular interest in that, and I wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to discuss it a little bit with you. And now if I've been reading your research a little bit, and one of the things that struck me was one of the reports, and I hope we can pull the slide up here, is a sort of vision or sort of view you have on technology architecture for the digital world, where you see this evolution of the tech stack in successful digital businesses in sort of three layers. If you work from the ground up, a foundational layer, a differentiating layer, and a agility layer. Could you spend a minute and talk us through what do you exactly mean with this, and explain this a little bit to us?
Yeah. So let's start with the value aligned word there you see on the on the left. When we saw how companies responded to this pandemic, in fact, digitally mature companies have always done this, which is only about 15% of firms, by the way. They are value aligned internally. They work against a common set of metrics across departments, kind of to what we were just talking about. They're also looking to value align technology and business, and so that there is a clearer understanding of what the impact, the benefit, the return on that technology is. And so if we overlay a recession and a need to prioritize tech spend and to have a rationalization and a prioritization discussion, in the last recession, 2008, 9, into 10, it basically became the CIO's job to say no and to cost cut. And since then, right, tech has become too vital to business. Spending by marketing, spending by product owners, spending by operations, spending by everybody in tech to actually execute a digital business strategy. And so if the CIO were to be handed the responsibility to do tech cutting now, they couldn't do it in the old way. They need a new playbook. And so that playbook that we are offering here, we call a new business conversation, says there will be multiple owners and stakeholders of the tech. Some tech is pure CIO. That's mostly the foundational stuff. Some technology, and the important technology, about 30% of the spend, by the way, is what we call differentiating technology. And then the last top, if you like, is very often owned and managed by business and marketers and their partners that we call agility technology. And that's about 10% of the spend. And it includes the things that change very rapidly on a quarterly or faster basis than ever. We're running experiments out there, perhaps. That differentiating layer is sort of shared ownership. There's a CIO contribution, a technology organization contribution, and a business or marketing contribution to that differentiating technology.
Yeah. So Ted, because a couple of years ago when you were reading the industry analyses, and I think McKinsey was one of the analysts or the consultants pitching the term, was the two-speed IT or shadow or core IT split, where you would have sort of two layers. And now all of a sudden it seems we're moving from 2 to 3 layers. Is that do you recognize that the 2-layer was something of the tens, and now we're moving into a new direction? Is that what you're saying?
Well, look, if I could back up a little bit here, Forrester never quite subscribed to the two-speed thing, because we always felt that changes in the core platforms were critical to support the new business models. And so you see that accelerating now in this digital transformation. I actually wrote a book in 2010 called Empowered. And that was at the sort of the peak of the BYO, the shadow IT kind of world, where IT was saying no to like mobile devices, for example, and business and marketing was saying, well, I got to have it. So they just brought in their own. And the book Empowered said you empower your employees to solve the problems of empowered customers. And so the shadow IT through that lens became an enabler, a business enabler. And that's what has happened over the last decade. Business people, and we have a lot of data on this, marketers have taken on board responsibility for technology spend and also impact. And so now the question becomes, how do I do that at scale? How do I create bedrock where I need it, differentiation that really, truly will make me successful as a company, and agility in order to respond to the next and the next and the next and the next.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we're definitely moving to a more sophisticated, if you like, conversation and shared responsibility and funding model when it comes to technology. And I think that is the future.
I mean, to make it a little bit concrete, I mean, so for everyone listening and watching to this, can you make it? What sort of platforms or what sort of tools, technologies should I be thinking of what are the functions that are served by that differentiating layer? What do I need to think of?
Yeah, so to not get too contentious here, because it's really easy for an owner of a technology to say, "Well, wait, I'm differentiated." So let's look at security, for example. Security is both foundational, it's differentiating, and it's required for agility. You have to have an end-to-end view of security, or else customers will not be protected. The firm will not be protected. But when you think about the differentiating technologies, the things that customers recognize as valuable, why they come to the company, these are more your front office facing systems. So that could be your experience layer, for example. It could be your end-to-end customer journey related to a transaction, from discovery to purchase to use to post-sale engagement. Those kinds of customer journey centric technologies are truly differentiating for companies. A digital platform to take your core competency out to other markets could be very differentiating if you're a bank or if you are a business service provider. And so, yes, absolutely. And then agility, really, that's the rapidly changing technology like low code or things that have to do with a new marketing channel support, for example.
Exactly. So what we've been experiencing in the past couple of years, where we've been tasked with developing, for instance, digital experience platforms, API gateways, integration layers. It is mainly also supporting all sort of the digital touch points, whether it's an app, whether it's a voice, whether it's an integration into a marketplace platform. And you want to have sort of one place to tie that all together and to distribute it back out to your ERP and your CRM and your production and this. So that is the sort of differentiating layer. If you build that right, you become flexible in the front end while maintaining a good alignment with your business architecture and business processes.
And I think that's a good way to look at, as technologies start in the agility sort of, get it done, they start to settle into this sort of platform layer, the differentiation layer, because they become core and they become needed across all touch points. CDP is a good example of that, a customer data platform, right? That's the only way you're going to be able to treat a customer consistently from beginning to end. And that technology is extremely differentiating if you do it well. And then
it becomes incredibly useful on all your digital channels.
That's right. It becomes foundational in the sense that you can apply it in every single channel, new and old, in a consistent way.
Okay. So we're not going to be naming any, vendors in this space, but
we're not actually. We think that's probably going to get us in more trouble and take us down the wrong path. What we really want is to have a better business conversation, so that we're using technology for maximum effect. And if there's money to be spent to do it, well, let's tap into those budgets that have that money.
Yeah, maybe one last question, and then I would like to move on to the last topic of today. But one last question, because you said when introducing this subject, you were talking about the differentiating layer being co-owned, and as anyone might be thinking, anything that has multiple owners is sort of a recipe for disaster. How do you, who's going to be CTO, CDO, Director of Digital, CIO? Who's going to be, driving and owning this differentiating layer?
Yeah, now that is a great question, and the answer is that there is a product owner. Somebody owns that sort of, in this case, differentiating capability, and they get designated as an owner. So, for example, somebody might own the CDP, somebody might own the shopping cart, somebody might own the integrated view of the customer life cycle, lifetime value. Those product owners, they could sit in IT. More likely, they will sit in more like an operating group. And so there's new operating structures and funding structures to support these capabilities. Because if you bury them in IT, they get junked in along every other priority. That is not the way to go.
You want to pull them closer to the business.
That's right.
Okay, makes sense. We have one last question coming in from Ed Kenny before we switch to the next subject, and I'm glad you're here, Ted, to help me answer this. The question is, what are your thoughts on the cost benefit of pulling differentiating features out of core products such as ERP or CRM and into the differentiating layer, I guess? How do you see that?
Yeah. So certainly we don't want the differentiating layer to be an excuse to not fix your core. You have to fix your core, right? You've got to rationalize your ERP. You've got to build consistency there. You have to do it. And you have to do it in a self-funding way because there's no extra budget for it. So journey to cloud is a big part of that. How do I create a flywheel of returns in a journey to cloud that helps me really anchor the core? There are going to be building blocks in that core and that foundation that need to be exposed up through the differentiating layers up to customer engagement. And so you mentioned API gateways as part of that. Companies that are doing this well are building these service layers. And they're investing very heavily in middleware, which of course is my old background, in order to expose that core functionality. But here again, there's an owner of that API. There's an owner of that product, if you like, around that API that allows that core technology to be used to exposed out through in differentiating ways out to customer touch points. So absolutely need to be able to dip down, reach into that core and pull it out. Otherwise, you can't have a new business model. I'll give you one really quick example. In media, there used to be bulk sales where you would sell all your media through, let's use cable TV as an example. Now you're selling direct with a subscription model. Well, that changes your financial system. You have to be able to do subscription billing.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's not something that you only want solved in the differentiating layer, right? I mean, you need to get at your core.
All the way through to your financial systems. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's it. So thanks a lot for that. And we should move on from technology as much as, we would love to spend another hour talking about this. But let's talk a little bit on our last topic of today, and that's the future of services. Because, another part of your research is doing, how agencies and other service providers are adapting their own approaches to work better with their clients and building platforms and processes for execution. And, you have a report coming out. It's going to be titled "The Future of Services is Value Orchestration." And it will try to answer questions about how do you source innovation and how do you price value or outcomes and how do you create next-gen ecosystems and incentives for co-creation, etc. And maybe before you answer this and get into this, I want to give a little bit of background of our perspective on this, and if in really broad strokes, maybe. So the first decade of this century, we as an agency were contracted a lot by businesses because literally for them it would be the only way of getting something done, getting some e-commerce, getting some shop out there, or getting an app or a social presence, because it was all relatively new and there was no capability in-house. Right. Then I think the next decade, so the last decade, everything. I think every business sort of woke up and they started building their own digital capabilities, in-housing as a big trend, and and getting suppliers and agencies to provide the staffing and the bodies to these in-house teams. And from our perspective, we think the best agency not only brought their own people in, but also the tools and methodologies, the mindset and the culture to make the digital teams, the in-house teams, successful. Right. That is I think you owe it to the clients to add that value as an agency when you provide the staffing for the in-house teams. So my guess is from the title of your report, we're going to be looking forward to a next decade where this relationship between businesses and agencies will change fundamentally. And please talk us through what you see happening.
Yeah, so you can see from this slide that I think there's a values alignment. There's sort of a mission and a value statement that that is embedded in a relationship that I'm going to call co-innovation partnerships. So when you think about sourcing innovation as an example, you want to bring the best of what's out there. That means that you want to tap into the innovation roadmaps of the best cloud providers, the best business service providers as well. And you also want to work with a partner like an agency or other service provider that is thinking bigger than just what a single company is doing, but able to bring that expertise in. If you're a company, you want to take advantage of that. And then as far as your priorities, and this goes back to that first topic we were talking about, is you want to think lean. You want to focus on your core and outsource what's non-core. And so in-housing agency services could be core because your marketing performance could be directly tied to a transaction, and those things might be tightly coupled. On the other hand, there may be things that you really want to outsource or do want to have a partner help you with. And so there's this core context thing that's been going on for decades now. It's resurging here. The second thing I'll say is that in order to work with somebody that can help you maximize your potential as a company, there has to be more than a project-based relationship. There has to be a program or a committed relationship with a provider. And that exists in some areas and is starting to happen more and more as companies are realizing that the difference between a strategic partner and a non-strategic partner is not just a word, it's actually the ability to get the most going, to get the most out of a partner. And then that co-innovation word says you got to be in it together. You have to be working to identify and solve problems together. You have to be making sure the right people do the right work, that teams are just extended teams. They're not separate, internal, external. So there's a lot of changes in what you look for in the relationship, and you want the partner to bring their own assets and their own best practices and their own data methodologies and their own alliance relationships so that you can get going faster and get going quickly. So that's really at the heart of what's going on here, is this continuous change, deeper relationships, and a lot more exchange of value happening there in the work.
Now, Ted, you talk with businesses, and what we would say our clients a lot in this industry, and I can imagine that many of these businesses would sort of trust you on this and see this, see the same trend and have the same strategy that want to build the relationships in these ways. But I think the trouble for them would be, how do I find this? How do I do my discovery and selection of the agencies, and what are sort of the traits of the agencies that they should be looking for? What are how do you find these agencies that provide these relationships?
Yeah, so that's of course the $64,000 question. Why bother to do this work at all? So what we are proposing to do, what we're going to publish, is essentially in addition to, let's say, call it an RFI or an assessment or consideration process that probes on these three things you just saw. So for value alignment, an example would be, what pricing models can you offer me that allow me to offload some risk to you and for you to participate in potentially some benefits that we achieve together. But we're also going to look at questions that help you illuminate expertise, alliance relationships, assets, intelligence, what sort of insights and data acumen and AI do you bring, and automation. So very specific questions to see if an agency is good at the things you care about, but also brings something to the party beyond just expertise. And so these questions will help, I think, narrow the scope beyond agencies that might look the same, but actually have very fundamentally different ways of engaging and helping their clients.
So you're talking about also about outcome-based pricing and differentiating pricing models, and obviously that's always a very interesting discussion if you're one-on-one on the table, as an agency with the client on that. I think from the agency world, there would probably be a surprising number of agencies that would be actually willing and able to get into these sorts of relationships and contracts. But the practice to hammer out all the details of, okay, how do you then define that relationship is in reality quite difficult. Do you see any sort of successful approaches there which could work in reality?
Yeah, well, look, this is becoming my life's work. I'll say it's that
I
hard.
didn't know that. I seriously didn't know
It
that.
is. I've been saying that this is becoming my life's work. Yeah, everybody needs a third chapter in their life, and I've decided this is going to be mine. So I'm not saying it's easy. In fact, it's quite difficult. McKinsey uses this model a lot. So at the business strategy level, it happens. And it happens in performance marketing, where you can create a self-funding model where if you increase the conversion rate, which leads to a sale that you can attribute, now you have a funding model that an agency could participate in. Those are places where their metrics are decided ahead of time, where success has a metric. So we need to bring that thinking down into other places. Now, not everything has to be a financial metric. There could be a milestone metric or an accomplishment metric. And so not everything is going to be about participating in revenue upside or cost takeout. That's maybe one corner case of it. A lot of these things are going to be just to move away from time and materials more toward things that are more value aligned, such as milestone based. And so what we're going to do next after this initial report is we're going to go at that problem, talk to procurement, talk to the contracting organizations, and identify these best practices in this portfolio approach, because every project, every sort of relationship will have a different flavor and composition. And so we're going to tackle it that way.
Yeah, because in the private sector, this is one thing, but what we experience, I think, also in the public sector, where there's, in the EU, there's all sorts of regulations in terms of tendering, etc. Right. And I don't see now, and I don't know if you see a change coming, that would be really interesting. But in the current tender rules typically don't allow for a lot of this flexibility in this. Do you see a change coming in that?
I don't want to pretend that I know, frankly. And apologies, there's some noise coming in over the line here.
Don't worry, we're all home.
You knew that was coming.
Yeah.
So look, I think it will start in the commercial sector and in commercial sectors that are transforming rapidly. I think that the sort of non-commercial sectors, government sectors, for example, will go much more slowly. However, milestone-based which is an outcome-based models can still work there. And the tender may still look quite the same, but we need to get everybody moving away from a cost-plus type model toward a success metric in selecting their provider.
Yeah, and I one thing that I would like to add to the discussion as well, is what we see in practice is that sort of the days of a single agency taking on all responsibility on a single domain, they're typically, I think those days are quite numbered, where in any sort of business process or program, it's typically a multi-party team which needs the values of trust, transparency, and value alignment all together. So I think in practice, if you need to work together with more than one supplier or agency and the client in one coherent team, you need to have a different discussion on pricing and contracting than the old.
That is quite a bit more complex.
Yeah, it's going to be more complex. Hey, I also, with an eye on the time here, I think we're running a little bit over the half hour that we allotted for ourselves. So I want to close down this part of the conversation, but there's a question has come in. It's a fairly detailed question, and it's referring back to the previous section of our conversation. But I just wanted to throw it back at you. Any thoughts on your favorite low-code software? There's a concrete question for you. I'm pretty fond of Notion and Airtable. Any fun?
So we've been doing this a lot at Forrester. Ask that person to reach out to me, and I'll send them our latest research on it.
That's good. We will show all your contact details in a little bit in the slides. The recordings and the slides are going to be freely distributable to everyone. So anyone that wants to look up this information can do so later on their own accord. So, Ted, I think we need to wrap up for today. I really, I think today we discussed, 3 topics where we started off first, on the states of businesses, on where we are. I think, quite an optimistic view of the world where the adaptive and the growing companies will have the opportunities to transform into digital. Some of the technical architecture needed for that, is also thinking about, how to layer your tech stack for growth and to make sure that it aligns with your business processes. And then the third part, I mean, when you have that said and done, or when you've been thinking about that, also, assembling the right teams and the right suppliers and agencies around that to make that work. So thanks so much for this conversation. I'm going to be switching to the last slide, and we can get this up. I want to thank you, Ted Schadler, Principal Analyst at Forrester, for this conversation. And if there's anyone wanting to have a follow-up conversation with either you or me, please feel free to reach out. This was a Dept Talks live, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.